Hello and welcome to the tutorial today. I'm Sam and this tutorial is for Samantha K Crafts. I'm going to decorate a box with some of the more spookier or creepier elements. These were originally done at Halloween, but obviously the skulls and the arms were done in such a way that they don't just have to be for Halloween, as you can see by this sort of toxic box as it's been named will show. So I've just got a box. It's got a hinged lid that shuts by a magnet, and any box will do. I just happen to have this box. It's quite a nice shape, a bit different, the triangle shape. I'm covering it here with white gesso, and you'll see that I'll give it sort of a couple of coats. The video has been sped up just purely because otherwise you're just going to see a real time of me painting a box, and it's going to take a bit long and it's not that interesting. So paint your box. I've painted it in gesso and then I gave it second coat in gesso as well, but you could paint it straight in acrylic, or you could paint it in a layer of gesso and then acrylic on top. So use your gesso as your base layer. I've used the gesso as both my layers. That's just because what I had to hand, and I didn't necessarily want that sheen that you get with acrylic sometimes. I wanted it to sort of still have that matte look, so I was happy to use the gesso for that. So I'm just making sure it's got a good covering. I'm using a flat paintbrush here, but you can use any type of paintbrush or sponge. You know, sponges are great for applying a lot of paint over a bigger area, and these don't have to be special sponges that you've bought from the craft shop. These can be your dishwashing type of sponges. Obviously don't use them to wash the dishes afterwards, and preferably get a new one. Don't use sort of an older one. But if it's got the scour bit on the back, you can sort of cut that off so that it's easier to hold. But yeah, sponge is great for covering bigger areas. Now I'm moving on to painting some of the elements that are going to go on the box. In this case, these are the skulls. There's a bigger one and a smaller one, and these are available on the website. Everything that I use is listed below in the description, or everything that I use that I know where you can get it, whether it be on my website or you know, somewhere else. I've put it on there, but if I don't know where to get it, I've still sort of listed what they are, so perhaps you can have a look around, or you might have something sitting in your stash that will double up instead. So I'm giving these again a quick coat of gesso, and again with these elements they're going to be covered in gesso. Now the thing to bear in mind when you've got something that's got a lot of details, like say the skull has, where it's got the smaller details, that if you put the paint on quite thick, it ends up filling up the little tiny gaps that you can see, and then that means you lose the details. So it's better to apply the coats thinly and build them up so that you don't lose them gaps, or as you can see me doing in parts of this video, sort of poking the brush or perhaps the end of a pokey tool or whatever through to clear out any paint that gathers, just so that you maintain the details that are in there. So here I'm about to use some black gesso, and I've changed the size of my brush because I just want minimal paint on the brush. But what I'm going to use here is basically a dry brushing sort of technique. And so I've put some of the black gesso onto my craft mat, and then I've dabbed my paintbrush in, and then I've dabbed my paintbrush off. Now it'd probably be better to have sort of a bit of kitchen towel or paper or something there to sort of dab it off a bit better, but I've sort of dabbed it off, and you can see that I'm starting on my craft mat and then gently taking my brush across so that it then covers the item. And the reason I do that is because I want it to go on really lightly, so it looks like so it just ages or distresses or adds a bit of texture to the items. So it's got to go on there lightly. If you go straight onto the item with the paintbrush, you risk being a bit too heavy-handed with that very first couple of strokes or very first stroke, which means it will go on too black. So you do kind of need to if you brush it to the side and then brush it over, you've already done that heavy-handed first stroke, because it's natural that one's slightly heavier when you go in, and then you're sort of moving across lightly to cover your object, and you'll see the effect at the end. It looks more grey than it does black because you've gone on so lightly. And this is the same sort of effect that I'm doing on the box now, but just with a different colour paint. And I have tried to put the paint types and paint colours, or the paint brands and paint colours, etc., in the corners or to the sides, so that you can see what they are. But of course, you can go for similar colours, you can go for the same colours, but they can be the same colours from a different, different brand or a different make, whatever you've got in your collection. You don't have to use, that's the great thing with crafting, even if you want to try and replicate something, you don't have to use exactly what that person has used. Make it your own, use your own stuff, use up the stuff you've got in your stash. This paint I barely use for anything else, so I wanted to get it out, wanted to use it. It's sort of almost a lime yellowy sort of green colour. It's not really used for anything else, but I thought for a toxic box it's going to be perfect, because it is that kind of, it looks toxic. So here I'm using a texture stamp. I can't remember who this is. I think, and I may be wrong, it might be one of Andy Skinner's stamps, but there are lots of texture stamps out there, or there are lots of ways to sort of create texture. But I'm using this one. It's sort of meant to be a peeled paint effect. Now, I'm not using it on a block, so it's a great technique if you have trouble putting pressure on stamps using blocks, because you've got problems, dexterity problems with your hands, because you don't need to use a block, you don't need to put on loads of pressure. I'm basically just stamping it on the pad, which is grey, not black, because black would look too harsh and look false, as opposed to making it look more realistic, so it's a grey. And I'm just using sections of the stamp, so each time I'm going to the stamp pad, I'm putting a different part of the stamp pad on this. There's different parts of the image, overlapping them, pushing harder in some areas than in other areas, and I'm just going by eye, really, where I think it might need a bit more, adding a bit more in different places. And again, if it's not on a block, it's a lot easier to sort of work around the hinges as I am here. It means that you can sort of get in there a bit more and a bit easier around these bends and these corners. And if you're worried about your hands getting mucky, I mean, I'd done another project before this one, so that's why my hands are so mucky. But if you're worried about your hands getting mucky, if you're holding it in your hand, it shouldn't get too mucky. But you put gloves on. There's lots of gloves that you can sort of get cheap enough now. So this is another texture stamp. This one looks more like scratches and scuffs. So I just wanted to add a bit of variation so that the elements are slightly different to the box. So I'm adding the sort of scratches and scuffs looks to that, and then I'm adding a couple to the box as well, just to sort of add to the effect of that, filling in perhaps some of the bits that look a bit plain. And you can see the texture's really building up on that box now. It's starting to look a bit old and tatty and like it's been through the wars. So this is the sort of look that I was going for. And this is a close-up. You can sort of see, and you can sort of see that yellowy green sort of colour on there. So now it's just, decide where you want your items. Have a play, try them in different areas, see what you fancy where. And this is a little blood drip stencil. You can make your texture paste in sort of some sort of drip lines. Anyway, this worked perfectly. It's not going to necessarily, it's not necessarily going to be blood, but it's going to be gunky and, like gunk and ooze is coming out of the box, which I just thought was perfect for the theme I was going for. So this was a little stencil I'd done a little while ago, and I've not really used it for anything, but I thought it'd be great to put some texture paste through. And it doesn't matter if the texture paste doesn't go through that neatly, because it doesn't have to be neat and perfect. This is gunk and ooze coming out of a box, so as long as I've got that on there. So this is texture paste in a pot. It's not actually texture paste, it's for something else. I can't remember what it's even marked up as, but it works great as a texture paste. So bear in mind, you might have something in your stash that isn't actually texture paste but works in the same way or a very similar way, and you can use that rather than going out and buying a texture paste. or of course you can make your own. I think I've done a video on this before. I'll try and link it if I can, but if not, I'm sure there's loads on YouTube of different videos of how to make your own texture paste. It isn't difficult, it can be done really inexpensively. So you know, you can always give that a go. It doesn't matter what texture paste you use, it's just to add a bit of texture and depth and make this look a bit more realistic once the sort of colours added to it. So just make sure if you've got, if it's an opening box that's got hinges, obviously just like I just did there, just make sure you sort of clear any texture paste away from the actual hinge, because you don't actually want it to hinder your hinge working in any way. So now I've got a couple of stamps that again fit with the toxic theme. This time I am using black rather than the grey, because they're meant to look more like signs that might be up on a wall. You know, if you went into a oh, what do you call it, like a, not a power plant, but yeah, that type of place. You know, if you went to that sort of place, the sort of things that you might find up on the wall there, they're meant to be that. So I am using a black. These naturally have a sort of distressed look to them, so they're not, you know, they're not a clear solid black stamp. I wouldn't advise using a clear solid black stamp, because this is meant to look aged and that at this stage. But this time, although it's on the block, so I get the majority of the image, you can see that I'm not always pressing it really hard. You know, so sometimes it's just an impression on there, or sometimes I'm stamping it once and then I'm using the second generation stamping, so then it's a slightly lighter colour. So, you know, just play, add them where you think you need them. This is just another stamp now. This time I've gone for a red, just to give it something to just make it pop and things sort of stand out a bit. So this is just a red ink, and it's the same sort of idea. I find as well, if you stamp off the edge of items, whether it be you're doing a mixed media piece, or you know, or this type of thing here, if you stamp off the edge, I find it just, it's not that it doesn't look professional or good without it, I just find it looks more natural, I think is what I'm trying to say. It looks more natural and realistic when things are off the edge, or, you know, if they're not as pristine and perfect and in line. I just think it has a better feel, but that's just preference, you know. If you find that against your nature to sort of have to stamp off the edge or whatever, I do say sort of just try it once or twice. You might really like the effects, but if you do find it difficult, stamp on there the whole stamp, using it in places. You know, this will be your project. This, if you're having a go at this or something very similar, it's your project, it's your creation. So you do what makes you comfortable, what you're happy doing. Now I've added the stamps and the texture paste is dry, I'm going to add some acrylic paint to the texture that I've added there. But what I've done is acrylic paint is quite thick. Even the thinner ones are still relatively thick, and they don't sort of necessarily run that well on their own. So I've again added it to my craft mat, sprayed some just water, nothing else, just water on it, and I'm just using a paintbrush, and all that does is, as much as it looks like I'm painting it, a lot of it is just is flowing itself. So because the texture's quite grainy and granularly, if I was painting on it, one, it would be a bit too bright if I'd painted without watering it down, and two, it wouldn't necessarily flow and fill the gaps. But because it's so fluid now, it's sort of filling in all the gaps around where it's so sort of textured, and it's sinking into that, so all the white sort of goes. So this is sort of red, and in a minute you'll see that I'll add another colour to really sort of give it that toxic look. So again, parts of the video are sped up. I was painting it quite quickly, but in some cases not as quick as it looks. But you know, this is for you to get the idea. I don't want you to get fed up just sort of watching me just paint stuff. Once you've got the idea, or you know how I've done it, or if I've watered paints down, or if I've used them straight away, or however I've used them, then I think that you get the idea and you don't need to sort of see it all in real time. And if you did want to see it in real time, just use the YouTube settings that they've got to slow the video down at them points. So while I've got the paint fluid and wet like this as well on the mat, I've loaded the brush up with some, and this time I've splatted it, or I'm splatting it on the box, so it just looks like blood splats, and some of these splats come out fantastic. Absolutely love them. Like that one just above the caution there looks great when you sort of see it in real. But yeah, it's just real nice red, this really vibrant, and it's just some splats. Just that's it, just literally flicking my brush at it, holding it not too close, not too far away, and just sort of adding some nice blood effects on there. And I love that one that just sort of came on there next to that caution sign there. They look really great. Love it when you get the sort of the towered effect to the paint rather than just sort of a circular effect. Now I'm just using the green that I used to sort of, or the yellowy green that I used to sort of dry brush on there earlier, and I'm sort of dabbing it with my finger, perhaps dabbing it a bit off on the mat because I don't want it to go on too thick. And I'm just going over bits of the black stamps that I just want to dull out a bit so that they don't look quite as bold or quite as bright. Again, just all adding to the effect, all adding to that dirty, toxic, aged effect. So the next step after this is I move on to using a spray, but I'm not using it as a spray. What I've done is I've unscrewed the spray top, and the sort of stalk piece that sort of sticks into the ink or into the spray, I'm using the end of that to apply it, because obviously it's so fluid that it is pretty much like water, that sort of fluidity. When I put it on, it really sort of runs, and in a minute you'll see that I sort of add, once I've sort of made sure enough's gone into the textured areas, I sort of add that little bit more, and you can see it's starting to happen here. It's starting to run past the textured areas, and I'm allowing it to do that. And in a minute you'll see me sort of shaking and knocking the box on the table just to encourage them runs to come down the box a bit more. But because I don't want them too intense down the side, I then will sort of dab it off a bit. But you can see it mixes over the red, and it just is this fantastic yuck colour. It's the only way I can describe it, but you know, that's what sort of toxic stuff should be. And you can see now at the bottom of some of these bits of texture that there's big pools of ink, and this will be used sort of when I sort of dab it off and sort of then reapply it here, and then sort of try and encourage it to run down a bit. You'll see the sort of effect that it gives. It's got these lovely runs in it. So again, you don't have to, you know, dab bits off. You could let it run all the way to the bottom. You could let it run part way down and then heat dry it so that you don't get it lighter at the bottom. It's sort of the same intense colour, but I was kind of liking the look of dabbing it off a bit once it had got to the level I sort of wanted them to be at. So I'm really sort of loading this up here. I don't know how clear you can sort of see it on the video, but I'm really loading these bits up here. They're really so it's really sort of being absorbed into the texture area and really pooling at the bottom of the runs. And like I say, just give it a jiggle and a wiggle, encourage it down, and look at some of them lovely runs that sort of come in. Add a bit more, don't add more, you know. And again, go for the colours you've got. If you haven't got any ink sprays, again, I'm not using this as a spray, but if you haven't got any ink sprays, dig out an acrylic paint or something that's a similar colour, or the colour that you want to use, and really water it down. Really water it down, and then use probably not a paintbrush, because a paintbrush absorbs it into it too much, but you know, get a little sort of spatula stick, or just a little bit of something to sort of dab it in the end and allow you to sort of drop it onto the project and create them sort of runs. You can use a paintbrush, but you sort of be wary to load it up a little bit more, because a lot of it will sink into the brush as opposed to sort of sitting on the outer edge of the brush, and as it does with these stalk bits that are sticking out of the spray. And again, I'm just adding, you know, I'm adding it round parts of the box that hasn't got texture. I'm just adding it to the edges, and again trying to create more runs and more toxic waste sort of coming out of the box. And you just keep doing this until you're happy. Until you're happy with the sort of effect you're getting. Especially when you're doing something like a toxic box, there's not much you can do wrong, because even if you do what you think is mess it up, it's a toxic grungy, yucky box. So it's very hard to go wrong because you're not doing a project that's pristine and neat and tidy, or you want to have a certain look to it. So, you know, this is a great project. If you're not used to mixed media or doing anything other than, say, perhaps card making or scrapbooking, this is a great project because you don't have to feel it's got to be pristine or neat or tidy or oh dear, you've overstamped in certain ways. I mean, here now I'm painting this spray, and again, all I'm doing now is dipping the paintbrush into that same spray. Now I started painting over it. You can see where I've gone over the edges in the white. Now I could have sanded them edges back first before painting that so that you couldn't see that. But I just thought it added to the look of the box. And again, obviously, you can paint the inside of your box, you can line the inside of your box, you know, with paper or material, or however you want to do it. And now at the end, now I've added everything on there. You know, you might have had an idea of where you want to put stuff, but once you've added all your stamps and stuff on there, there might be certain areas that you don't want to cover up, or a certain piece that you were going to put in a certain place might not look quite right now because it might look too busy with all the stamps and splats and whatever else on there. So just have another play, check that you're happy with where you're going to sort of put your pieces on there. And again, I've gone back to using that spray again only because I want sort of a similar colour. And again, you can do the same with your watered down paint or whatever you may have used to create your drip colour. But you can see that I've gone from using my brush, which was sort of putting it on too much, and went into just dabbing my finger in it and just swiping it on the edge. And again, it just gives that mossy, yucky, old, dirty sort of look to the skull, and just helps the skull stand out from the box a little bit more. When you saw me try it on there a minute ago to see how I felt about it still being there, it kind of, because the cracks are sort of a grey colour and the stamps are black, you know, it kind of, you kind of lose the definition of it a little bit. But as soon as you put that green on the edges a little bit, it just helps it stand back out again from the background. And that's all you're doing, is sort of just creating that not just that look of grunginess, but just helping it sort of stand out so that the elements aren't lost on the project that you're sort of doing. So I've done the same for all the pieces, and you can sort of see the effect they've got on them. And that was just an MDF piece, and look at that, it looks great. It looks scratched and scuffed and dirty and yucky. That's perfect for this project. So now just using some good glue. I use Cosmic Shimmer. I've used Cosmic Shimmer for a long time just because I find it sticks almost anything that I want to stick, even metal to wood, obviously wood to wood in this case, and the painted surfaces and stuff like that. It's got a really good holding quality. So it might take a little, you know, because it's a liquid glue, it might take a little longer to sort of set, but it has got really good holding quality. And years and years ago, you know, I kind of was under the thing of a glue's a glue, and I used it. I used a friend's who swore by it, and I must admit, since that day, I've never looked back. That's the only glue I've really sort of used, apart from if I'm doing sort of a big kit, I might use wood glue with hot glue to sort of help hold pieces in place. But 9 times out of 10, for any sort of project like this, it's or card making or anything, it's the Cosmic Shimmer. But again, you might have a favourite glue, use your favourite glue. This, you know, the elements aren't heavy in this case, so, you know, as long as it will stick wood to paint or MDF to paint, then you're good to go. And that is the finished Toxic box. And like I said, you can't really go much wrong. It is meant to look dirty and grungy and toxic. So you can just sort of have fun with trying different techniques and adding different colours. But it just looks really sort of grungy, and yeah, I was really pleased sort of with how it turned out. And hopefully if you have a go or have a go at anything sort of similar with it, you'll come across to the Facebook page to share it. I'll put all the details of that sort of stuff down below. But I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. Take care, and I'll see you next time.